Neighbors in a tiny village in Toliara, Madagascar were taken aback by a rancid smell that was coming from a vacant house in a neighborhood. They tried ignoring the stench at first. When the smell became too overwhelming, they decided to contact the authorities. But no one could have imagined what was lurking inside the home. At first, the villagers couldn't identify where the smell was coming from. But it was growing stronger every day. And yet nobody wanted to accuse a fellow neighbor. But eventually the smell got so bad that everyone banded together and realized the stench was coming from an abandoned house. But what could they do about it? Now that they knew where the smell was coming from, they had to find a way to get inside, but it would have been illegal to enter the two-story house. So, they considered calling the cops at first. But they feared the authorities would ignore them over such a silly issue. Then they considered reporting the house as overrun to the city, but something happened that stopped them from calling anyone. The villagers never imagined anyone would willingly live in that neglected house, but then they noticed people coming and going from the home. They were glad they hadn't called the cops or stormed in. And eventually, the smell went away, which allowed the neighbors to mind their own business for a while. But the worst was yet to come. That foul stench returned with a vengeance, forcing the neighbors to get together and discuss what actions they needed to take. This time, they all agreed they had to call the police. They told authorities that the smell had started to concern them, but the officers had their own theory of what could be causing that rancid stench. The cops took a closer look at the mysterious house. They even brought along some of the neighbors to guide them. But they had no idea what to expect, so they brought a wildlife expert and medical examiner along, too. Would these so-called experts be capable of handling what they were about to face? Sori Randranjafizanaka was a member of the Wildlife Committee and also head of the agency that was called in to assist the cops. The department was often involved in cases that dealt with foul-smelling homes. But when she heard about the house, she decided to investigate it personally. Coincidentally, her home was in the area. She even had her own theory on what could be causing the smell, but she was completely wrong. The home was located in the city of Toliara on the southwest coast of Madagascar. The village was a peaceful and beautiful place, which is why cops doubted the smell was caused by foul play. So, instead, they called Randranjafizanaka because they thought the stench was most likely caused by wildlife. The Environment Agency had been around for a while and they have seen tons of incidents involving animals. In fact, they had dealt with anywhere from harmless kittens to ferocious predators. It's why the cops were glad they came along. But what was lurking inside would end up stumping the experts, too. When they arrived at the house, they couldn't put a name to the stench. Even Randranjafizanaka herself was puzzled as she prepared to walk in. She had dealt with different situations, but this one was really weird, and no one was entirely sure what they would find inside the house. Aside from the odious stench coming from within, the home's exterior looked relatively normal. But it was difficult to see what dark secrets lurked inside. There were no sounds coming from inside either. They couldn't help but wonder why the house was abandoned in the first place. And, as far as they knew, the house wasn't on sale. So, what was this home hiding? When cops stepped inside, the stench was so powerful that it made them feel lightheaded. But they fought through the regurgitating stench and headed deeper into the unknown. Randranjafizanaka suspected that it could have been animal waste. But where were the animals? Randranjafizanaka was almost sure that only a trapped animal could produce such an overwhelming smell. That being said, she wasn't ruling out the possibility that people could be lurking inside, too. But she still had a lot of questions, and she was about to get the answers she was looking for. As they made their way through the property, they heard a noise that left everyone paralyzed with fear. It hadn't been too loud, but everyone heard it. As they continued walking through the house, they remained vigilant. And as it turned out, there were 2 people inside the property and they were in a state of shock. This left the cops and the experts even more puzzled than they were before. The other people had shovels in their hands, as they were clearly digging holes. But they were surrounded by various other objects, too. The team had no idea what to do next. Not only was the house occupied, but the people living inside were suspiciously digging holes. When cops asked them what they were doing, the strangers started behaving oddly. They were obviously hiding something. When the cops got even closer, they dropped their shovels. But the team still had no idea why they were acting like they had just committed a crime. It would have been pointless to struggle with the police. So, the diggers put their hands up. The puzzled cops followed protocol and arrested them. But then they went back into the house to see what the diggers were trying to hide, even if that meant dealing with the stench. Then the ground moved. Once the cops took another look at the rooms, it became clear that the house was completely destroyed. There were no lights. The ceilings and windows had cobwebs on them. But they were still trying to look for the source of the smell. Then they felt the floor move. But after getting over the initial shock, they finally realized what the source was. The team looked down at their feet and were horrified to discover that the whole floor was covered in tortoises. Brandranjafizanaka realized these weren't your run-of-the-mill tortoises. She had no idea where they came from, though. But she knew they were in trouble. Brandranjafizanaka knew that she needed to relocate the tortoises to a safer location. These creatures had been treated horribly, and she feared many of them would not survive. But every second the tortoises remained behind put their lives in greater jeopardy. Brandranjafizanaka discovered that the tortoises were a rare species indigenous to Madagascar known as the radiated tortoises. They're very docile and have unique markings on their shells. Suddenly, she realized why the people they had arrested had so many of them. Some criminals poach these creatures because they're extremely rare. Others eat them as a rare delicacy while others keep them as pets. But it's against the law to own, steal, or illegally sell these tortoises because their mistreatment has led to their near extinction. The authorities rescued 9,888 tortoises from the house. They debated whether to return them to the wild or have them live out their lives in a facility. Unfortunately, one facility couldn't look after all of them, so they had to make a very tough call. Unfortunately, the tortoises had spent most of their lives living in deplorable conditions, so returning them to the wild would have put them at risk of being caught by poachers or dying from the elements. So, the team came up with a more life-saving alternative. The tortoises have a team dedicated to giving them the attention and care they deserve. They make sure they got food, water, and love. And with 9,888 tortoises, the researchers started looking for ways to increase the population's numbers. 3 people responsible for hoarding these defenseless turtles, 2 men and a woman, received long prison sentences, which also sent a message to anyone who might be doing something similar to other animals. If you hold creatures in a confined space, you'll end up in a confined space yourself. If you enjoyed this story, wait for our next story starting in 10 seconds. She wrung her hands together under the table in an effort to calm her nerves. This wasn't going well and had just taken a turn for the worst when he looked into her eyes and told her, "I know where you live." It felt like her heart stopped dead in her chest and the blood drained from her face. Her mind raced through every possible excuse to escape, but there was no way out. She had just joined the student government at college and was excited about meeting a group of students that shared her passion and motivation. The students are charged with managing a wide range of events, activities, programs, policies, and initiatives around the school, and it would be great to make some new friends. As fate would have it, Laura made a new friend on the very first day and was quick to agree to swap numbers since they were working in the same department. What she didn't know was that he was not what he said he was, and it would be a lot later before she saw his true side. Soon she would look back and regret every decision leading to the trap he laid. She had finished up class for the day and was headed home when a text message came through, "Really enjoyed meeting you today. Care to join me for a bite to eat later?" To a new girl at college, Laura was quite happy at the idea of not having to eat alone, and dinner with a new friend sounded like a great idea. "He seemed so nice. I'd like that a lot," she texted back. He recommended a casual place that was a definitely further than walking distance away and offered her a lift, saying he knew it was out of the way. Strangely, no alarm bells were going off, he just seemed like a really nice guy. Laura sent him her location and they set a time. She threw on some fresh clothes and spent some time touching up her makeup since there was some time to kill before heading out. A new town to explore, new people to meet, good food and a new friend. It seemed the new school was turning out to be pretty great, or so she thought. At 7 p.m. she looked out the window at the sound of a car horn. He was right on time and she locked up and jumped into the passenger door after a quick and friendly, "Hi." Laura wanted to chat about their new jobs at the college, however, it seemed that he wasn't very interested in the subject, so she just went with the flow. By the time they had found a table at the restaurant, the alarm bells were ringing in full force. It was like something out of Jekyll and Hyde. Who was this guy? Because he certainly wasn't that nice guy who had asked her to dinner, which, to make matters worse, he clearly thought of as a date. Laura became more uncomfortable the more he spoke, dropping inappropriate comments that she was pretty sure most of the tables around her could clearly hear. The appetizers finally came to the table and she grabbed onto hers as a lifeline. By now it was all a matter of sitting through the nightmare and moving it along as quickly as she could. Her plan backfired when he commented on how quickly she ate her food and she blushed a deep red. He was so loud, she just wanted to be swallowed into the ground. But enough is really enough. Laura quietly but firmly interjected on his indecent comment and was immediately silenced, his hand shooing her words away, but it wasn't his actions, but rather what he said that left her silent. He responded with, "Sweetheart, I picked you up, I know where you live." She heard roaring in her ears. She was stuck and now with no escape. The scraping of a chair next to their table snapped her back to reality. Looking up, they both are a bit lost for words. He walked over, grabbed a nearby chair, flipped it around and sat down. Then, he pulls out his police ID and puts it on the table. Now it's the guy that doesn't have any color in his face. In awe, she watched the best rescue happen right in front of her. "So, I'm quietly celebrating my daughter's birthday with my family," he begins, addressing her, "date, when I distinctly hear you threaten this young lady. Would you care to explain yourself?" The cop asks without expecting much of an answer, so he continues promptly. "Now see, we take a very dim view of that kind of thing, so right now I'm deciding if I want to have some of my buddies come pick you up." Laura fought to keep her mouth closed at the unreal events taking place in front of her. She didn't know whether to laugh out loud or cry from relief. "But that would disrupt everyone's dinner, so how about you hand me your ID, because I wouldn't want you running off on me, then you go see one of the staff here and settle your bill. The full bill now. This young lady shouldn't go hungry on account of your poor behavior. Or we can go with the first option, I'll leave it up to you." He very quickly agrees and hands over his ID, scuttling away to pay the bill. As the officer took down the information on the card, he, incredibly, apologized to Laura for interrupting. "Sorry about that, miss. I hope I'm not intruding. It just seemed like you could use some help. Oh, and don't worry, if you want to pursue this further, I'll have some of the boys pick him up on his way home. We can definitely take this further." Maybe she just wanted this all to be over and done with, or perhaps it was just that she was so certain she was safe from this creep after the talking to he got that she didn't feel that it was necessary. Then the officer offered her something she never expected. "Well, I'm here with my daughter, she's about your age, perhaps you'd like to finish your meal with us? We can run you home afterward if you'd like, unless you'd prefer to call someone else." How could she do anything other than accept? Mr. Nice Guy returned from paying the bill and, suddenly possessing a lot more manners, and asked for his ID back. "There you go. Now I have your details right here, so I highly recommend you don't go near or contact this young lady ever again." It was the best thing that Laura had heard all night. Explicit instruction to get lost was the cherry on top of this turnaround. Yes, of course, I'm so sorry." He stuttered and then turned to flee from the restaurant without so much as a goodbye, which was a huge relief. The restaurant felt bigger, as though she could breathe again, and Laura picked up her plate and joined the police officer and his family, thanking him again. They spent the evening celebrating until almost all of the other customers were leaving, relaxed and laughing. Laura's evening had gone from a dangerous, ugly night to one where the creepy guy learned an important lesson. Laura did enjoy her evening in the end and was happy when she was dropped off at her front door. She looked around to make sure everything was safe. The fact that that guy still had her address wasn't something she could just shake off easily, but she was reassured, as the family waited until she was inside and safe. Nothing looked out of order, and she had the officer's number, just in case she changed her mind about taking it further. Laura never did see her date again. They were meant to be working together, and it was something that worried her. Seeing him again on a daily basis, and while she was relieved that he wasn't around, it made her wonder just how he had so easily pretended to be at her college just to get her number.